So a really quick talk on tiling textures. If you open up Photoshop, tiling textures are often useful because you can have them scale across an entire thing. So you get one brick texture and you apply it to everything across a whole wall. And getting a good tiling texture is one of those really required basic skills of 3D. So if I have a document that is a power of 2, 1024 by 1024, and I go on the internet and I look for grass texture. No, let's go brick. Just cheat. Go to Google. Grab the first one you see. Don't check your legality. Actually, no, I want to do this with something that's a little harder. I want one that's perspective distortion. So we have to fix it. So something like this is good, because this is something a person, this might be hand painted or something. I'm going to copy the image and paste it in here. And we can start to see, first off, make sure your image is on. So the first thing to do is get this into a place where perhaps it's all these. And you might want to try and get these so that they're lining up, so that this is sort of in perspective and this is a little more. And maybe we want these to have a little bit of white mortar at the top and bottom of here. I'm going to crop this with the crop tool. So now we have the problem of making this tile, and the easiest way to do this is just filter other offset, and we can type in, say, 512 by 512, and you'll notice that it moves the image 512 and wraps it around the other side, and then 512 on the other side. And now we can start to see some of the problems involved in this, and that there's lots and lots of color distortion. But there's also some brick issues here. So I might start by just with the healing brush or the clone stamp. You have to be careful with the clone stamp tool because it's very easy to accidentally over destroy your picture. So I'm going to activate the clone stamp tool, and holding Alt I can click where I want to set this as a baseline, and then just holding Shift I'll go all the way down, maybe fix that. And we can see how it might have caused some problems, such as right here. I'll set another mortar area like right there. I'm clicking and then I'm holding Shift to make this very specific. That's pretty good. And you can clean this up more or less if you want. You might start doing things like clone stamping individual bricks in on the areas that kind of got damaged. And another thing you might do, it's one of those things where you have to like do it to learn that you made a mistake. But oftentimes when you're clone stamping, you're causing those problems, and that's not very good. So you might actually want to start manual clone stamping like this, where you can copy and paste an individual brick, erase a little bit over here, and the benefit of this is you can be quite explicit in terms of where you're dumping this brick or not. Did I hit record? Yes. So let's say this is good enough for business work. You can continue polishing this long into the night, but it's pretty good. And you can double check by perhaps offsetting at 256% or 256 pixels. That's okay. And then you'll find smaller areas where perhaps you added a new mistake. That's where you might want to start using the healing brush. Any other major errors? Oh, that looks pretty good. Now the problem is, let's say I save this, as always with great naming conventions, to my desktop. Great naming conventions and great file structure. I'll erase this there. Now if I wasn't live demoing individual things, I actually would be quite aggressive about this. So let's try applying this brick texture over here on this guy with a new texture. Design, new material, blend. Again, I tend to use blends for everything, just because when in doubt you can take all the reflectivity off of it and then it's a Lambert. You might suffer a little bit of render time, but oh well. There's my horribly named file. And let's view this with flat lighting and with slight smoothing. What am I looking for? Flat lighting. So now we can try and modify how often we see these bricks by going into the UV texture node. So over here on our blend, we have this color node. We go in here, and we can actually continue going into its inputs and find that place 2D texture node. Again, these exist as objects that are hooked up to each other in some sort of little spider web. And you can always go and see that spider web under Window, Render Editors, Hypershade. Hypershade. Which now is mysteriously off screen as well. Okay, there we go. So if I select this blend material and click the map inputs and outputs, we can see that it has a place 2D texture node, which is going into this file node, which is going into this material. And we can actually modify these by selecting this, and perhaps we can type in repeat UV of 5, and now this brick texture is going to be seen a lot more. Now you're probably noticing something, which is a problem of how textures tile. We're seeing this weird white outline here, and that's because this was taken from a photograph, and we're having some of the leftover light distortion of this. This has probably had a small amount of vignetting, and as a result we're seeing that as the black part, which when tiled hits up against the white part where the bricks were lit. Or if the light source was over here and it gradiented over, eventually this got darker. And so we have to fix that in our texture, and there's a couple ways to do that. I'm going to duplicate this and use the filter other high pass filter first. What the high pass filter does is it starts trying to extract value and color data and throw it away while keeping in sort of contrast detail. So if I go way up, you can see eventually there's not much happening at all. But if I go way down, it eventually blurs everything into gray. And so you can use this to sort of create a uniformity to your texture.
Let's see, where did you go to the high pass?
Filter, other, high pass. So if I reload that texture, you'll notice that it doesn't look like bricks, but it doesn't have that weird light distortion causing that break in uniformity. So next, the problem after that is trying to color this, and there's a couple ways you might try to do that. You might actually have your initial texture and set it to color or hue. Color. And on this initial node, I'm going to show you my preferred way of selecting things. I think this is definitely the way that you should always select things, which is select by color range. And what the select by color range does is it lets you sort of select one thing, and it actually gradients out depending on the fuzziness from more harsh or less harsh. It's so tragic that the magic wand is still around as this legacy tool in Photoshop, because that doesn't have this sort of gradient effect. So I can do that, and now I'm selecting just the mortar. We can check that by either looking in our quick mask here. And I'll actually invert my selection. And I'm going to darken the bricks. This is a good time to first off turn on those other bricks, and also hit Control H. What Control H does is it hides your selection, and it's something that's very, very difficult to swallow when you're new at Photoshop, but it's such a good thing. The problem is now we have a selection that we just don't know exists, and so you might start doing things like, oh no, why isn't my brush working when I try to paint on these? Well, it's because you have a selection still. But so we can lower that, we can invert my selection and hide it again, and perhaps lighten this mortar. So let's save this out as a PNG of a triangle. It's got that one blue one, but otherwise it's looking pretty good, right? I'll do that same thing of select by color range. I'll just select the blue channel. And it says nothing was selected, but something was actually selected. If I go into my quick mask, I can hit Control L and essentially make this mask more high contrast. And now I think I ought to use color range with the eyedropper instead. Control H to hide. And then I'm going to try and make this a little more red. Close enough. Save it as triangles.png. Great file name. And then I can start making this texture even more fancy. This was a texture generated from a bitmap, so I can use Insane Bump to... does it uninstall Insane Bump every time? Where is Insane Bump? Alright. I'm gonna go download it again. Well, that's Crazy Bump's on. Yeah. If you want, you can use Crazy Bump. You sucker who spent money on a program. See, look at how long it's taking to load. Open. On the desktop. Let's find my bricks. This shit. So, instant normal. And Insane Crazy Bump gives you a nice little preview you can zoom in on. You can modify these. Point is, I'll just save it. Save normals to a file, such as the desktop. What a great naming convention. And now I'm going to turn use default lighting back on and actually add that in as a bump map. And again, I'm happy to do this multiple times because so many of you are going to have a normal map that looks like shit because you forgot to turn it to tangent space normals. So just make sure you do that every time. Ew. So what's happening here is that normal map is using a different UV texture node, or place 2D texture node than the other one. So if you see this in the rendering editor, Hypershade editor, which hopefully exists, I can graph this. And this one we want to be on 10 as well. Now that's starting to look kind of like a thing. It's way too shiny for bricks, but I don't know. Maybe bricks in the rain.
Sounds like a really nice job.
Bricks. And specularity is also nice. But you can see how, so this is the specularity map that Crazy Bump is generating. And yeah, it's cool that it just spits this out, but think about all those ingredients that you could have made a recipe out of. How hard would it be to actually make this same image just using the files? It would just be like edge detect, maybe remapping it with a gradient. It's cool that you get this information, but it's not necessarily something that you couldn't do by eyeballing it if you understand your ingredients. Desktop. Triangle spec, because this is so triangular. Wonderful naming convention. That bump is way too small. So under this, with a reflective color, and again, it's going to have the wrong repeat on the UVs. You have to go and fix that. Alright, so that's some basics of tiling textures, how you have to slice and dice them, and then how you can actually turn them into something later. But again, I promised lab time, and I should actually stick by that, shouldn't I? I'm such a blabber.